Good afternoon, everyone. Thiru Vignarajah here on behalf of the family of Ronnie Silver II. I'm here with representatives of a very large, very loving family, some of his closest family members, his mother, his aunt, his brother, one of his children's mothers are all here to remind the world that we have not forgotten about Ronnie Silver. We have waited a long time for the first of what we anticipate are a series of reports that chronicle how tragic and unavoidable this horrific death was. The family was advised a couple of days ago that this report would be coming out. We did, as a courtesy, ask for an advance copy so that we didn't have to hear from the media what was in this heartbreaking report. We didn't get a response, so we are certainly disappointed by that lack of communication, which has been a feature of this investigation for too long. Nevertheless, the findings of the report are far more troubling. This is a law firm that was expected to paint the city in as bright a light, as favorable a light as possible. And even that law firm could not find much to redeem the approach that DPW has taken for years. The headlines that the public will read are that no safety standards were present for years, that no training has been done for years, that no communication or emergency lines were available for years. What the family reads is that this death was as horrific and tragic as it was avoidable and preventable. This is not gold standard safety precautions that the family is asking or expecting. This is the very basics. There are four parts of the report that I wanted to draw out and emphasize that were especially galling to the family. This city, this agency, had done safety trainings in the past. They presumably understood the value of them. In fact, they emphasized that what they relied on was frontline workers to take care of themselves, to self-diagnose. But they hadn't been trained in years on what the symptoms and warning signs might be. According to the report, no training had been done since 2022. That is little comfort to the family of Ronnie Silver because Mr. Silver joined in late 2023. He was still on probation. It had been years since the last training had been done, and no training had been done when he was out there facing 100-degree plus weather conditions. The second thing that was galling was to hear not only that there was a culture of retaliation that was meant to silence frontline workers from raising concerns, but the methods that DPW used to enforce that culture of silence, to have frontline workers know that if they complained, they might not get a vehicle with air conditioning, that if their vehicle was in the shop, that the replacement vehicle they might get as retaliation would be one that didn't have air conditioning. You don't do that to anyone. You certainly don't do it to the hardworking public sector employees that are paid by our taxpayer dollars. The third thing that we found galling was that there was an emergency phone that was meant for situations like this, but that the majority of the people that were interviewed by this law firm didn't know about it, didn't know of its existence, certainly didn't know how to use it. We don't know what the details of that day were, but the fact that that was the practice, that they realize that there might be an emergency out on the streets, that an emergency phone might be handy, but that they didn't tell anyone about it, that too is unacceptable. The last piece that was perhaps the hardest for me to read, second only perhaps to the methods that the city used to silence frontline workers from sharing their concerns in a public and constructive way, was that this was not the first time. In fact, according to the report, there was a history of heat-related, exhaustion-related episodes, and that they were all inadequately responded to. One of the reasons why, as galling as that was, it didn't shock us is because so much of what's in this report was chronicled or introduced in the report of the Inspector General just weeks and months earlier, and nothing was done. This is an agency that refused to listen to warning signs. This is an agency that refused to respond to cautionary, constructive reports from the Inspector General or from frontline workers. This is an agency that literally closed its eyes and shut its ears to a history of heat-related episodes until the death of Ronnie Silver. Suddenly, there was time on the clock for trainings. Suddenly, there was room in the budget for outside audits and independent evaluations. It shouldn't require a tragedy to do the right thing. It shouldn't require a man's death to do what is a basic requirement of being humane. We're not asking for gold standards. We're asking for the basic extension of grace and humanity that you would give to a neighbor, to a stranger, certainly to someone who works for you. I want to end by saying that this family is anxious to say more. All of you, I will emphasize, are invited to contact me to have sit-down interviews with the family to talk about the life and legacy of Ronnie Silver II. He is a cornerstone of this family even now. His absence echoes every day in all the things that he is not there to do, to provide for, all of the memories he is not there to shape. And this family wants the world to know about him. Today, I am speaking on their behalf because this report has legal implications. Many of you have asked about what legal options this family may pursue, and this certainly heightens the likelihood that a lawsuit may be needed to bring a measure of justice to the family. There are two more reports that we expect, one from the state agency MOSH, another we hope from the Inspector General. We will wait for those reports before we make any ultimate decisions, but because of the legal implications, the family has asked me to comment on the report. If I can ask for them in a word to just share what this report means for each of them, if you're going to just say a word each, I would appreciate that, and I know the media would appreciate that. This is Faith, Ronnie's mother. If in one word.
Heartbreaking. Heartbreaking.
Miss Meredith.
Heartbreaking.
I can't stop but remind everyone that these are folks that don't pick up our trash for six-figure salaries. They do it for what is below a living wage. These are folks that pick up our trash not because it was their dream job, but in too many cases because it was their only option to provide for their family. They woke up early and went into unbearable conditions to provide for their family, to make sure that they were trying to get a little bit of dignity and humanity back into their homes, into their lives. This just ain't how you treat people like that. And if it was the death of Ronnie Silver II that wakes this city up, so be it. But it should never have come to that. And this report chronicles example after example after example of why you could have seen this not from a week earlier or a few yards away, but from years earlier and from a mile away. I'll take a few questions.
With the culture of bullying and harassment, do you know if Ronnie Silver experienced that himself personally or even witnessed it?
I can share, based on what we have heard from the people closest to him, that he was not immune from this culture. That everyone that he knew, that they know, were afraid to speak up. And that the few people that did were reprimanded or retaliated against in not subtle ways. I mean, this wasn't like you might have your salary docketed or you might get written up. These were people that knew that they would not get shifts, that they would be deprived of overtime opportunities, that they would be put on worse routes, that they would not have access to a vehicle with air conditioning. Everybody knew that they needed to shut up or face the consequences.
Nothing in this report detailed the specifics of the circumstances that led up to Ronald Silver's death. What is it like for the family still having to wait for answers?
I mean, Rebecca, you were there on the very first day we stood out here in front of City Hall and said, it is impossible for this family to heal while they remain in the dark about what happened that day. We have learned a fraction of what we believe is out there. And even what we know breaks your heart. But to now have allowed months to pass without the agency that was responsible for this man's death to not be able to share so much as a phone call to say, we're looking into it and we're going to tell you when we're going to have answers as to what happened that day. Maybe they're waiting for the lawsuit. Maybe some lawyer told them, you got to keep your mouth shut and close your eyes, because that's what this agency has done for years. But if you're trying to signal that you're ushering in a new chapter, act like it. Tell this family what you know. Tell this family when they can expect to know what happened that particular day.
Do you think there's been meaningful change? We saw from the city's news release, the mayor's news release, they say these are all the things we've done or are planning to do. Do you think that there has been the kind of change that is needed to prevent this from happening?
Look, I'll be honest. I want to believe that the head of DPW, that City Hall leadership wants to see this never happen again. Whether it's to avoid the embarrassment and the lawsuits, or whether it's because it's the right thing to do. I genuinely believe that they want it. But good intentions has been the mark of this administration for way too long. What we want to see is actual effects and results. We just haven't seen it. This is a report that comes out, months later, that says you ought to make sure that there's a hotline for DPW workers to be able to call so that they can share their concerns without fear of retaliation. You ought to make sure that you have vehicles that have air conditioning in them when there are 100-degree days out there. Even the most basic things are still being chronicled as problems in this report. I think this family will believe it when it sees it.
What history of heat-related issues were jumped out to you?
You know, one of the things that I wanted to make sure I closed by is asking for the city to release the underlying investigation in this case. This is the summary report. You know, I worked at a big firm. We often did summary reports for the public. But underneath that summary report were dozens and dozens of interviews that were conducted. Now, what they're going to say is, oh, that's part of attorney-client privilege. That's part of work product. But every attorney knows that the client, the city of Baltimore, can waive that privilege. If the spirit of this was to make sure that the public knows what they know, then they ought to release it. They ought to release every interview. They can redact the names of who was interviewed. They can protect the privacy of the people that shared this information. But the actual interviews, the actual episodes, it's not in the report. I don't know if I can read from it, but Ryan, can you just open this for a second? All right, I'm not going to read it in the sunlight, but literally in the middle of the report, it says we have uncovered a history of heat-related episodes that were inadequately responded to. That's in black and white as one of the headline sentences. To not be able to tell the public how many, how severe, when did they last happen, what did they do that was an inadequate response, that leaves us guessing. And frankly, we're not inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt that these were folks that were sweating profusely. I think it references people that were fainting, that were passing out, that were unconscious. I think the public deserves to know what City Hall leadership knows. And if there are documents confirming that, they ought to be the subject of a Maryland Public Information Act request. And if you guys don't file it, we will. But the right thing to do is, if this information is available to the public, was available to this law firm, it ought to be available to all of us.
I know you don't know much about what happened that day, but do you know anything about the symptoms that he was experiencing that day that could have helped him identify that he was experiencing heat exhaustion?
I don't know that we're in a position to share more than we have. We want to make sure that the other investigators that are doing this share their information. We obviously have access to the autopsy like the public does. We're not in the business of hiding what we know. And we will, out of respect for the other investigations, we have provided them a measure of grace to complete and share their results. But the family will share what it has learned in due course as well. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for your continued attention to this important issue.